Okay, people. It's not a good one. It is not a good one this week. This week we suffered through Blood Meridian by Cormac McCarthy. It's a good name. I wanted to read a western, and so I did ye old Google search, and his name came up. And one of the books he had done was No Country for Old Men. I saw the movie. The movie was good. And I was like, wow, I didn't know it was a book first. I'm interested. So I go to my, what I've been doing a lot here recently, the Audible Plus, and there it was. I could read it as part of the subscription. But then this one was there, and it's like it's going to be gone in a minute. I'm like, well, I get that one out of the way, and then later I can do the other one. Right? That was my idea. So that's why I picked Blood Meridian. I had no other reason other than I wanted a Western, and I had heard of this person's name in relation to that movie. It started off good. It starts off good. The chapter starts, I believe it's a chapter start. Now, again, I don't have the physical book. I guess this is a minor difference in that I can't tell, there could be a chapter. It can be a chapter with a title, or it can just sort of, the page can start interesting. I can have one of these little quotes. I'm not sure how it looks on the page, so to speak. So I can't speak on that per se. But it sounds like each chapter title or starts with sort of a rundown. And this one it's like Shot, Galveston, Toadvine, burning hotel, escape. These kind of verbiages, right? He'll do each. It reminded me of two things because then once the book starts, it's very poetic, very good writing, very poetic. What do I mean? The mother dead there 14 years. The mother dead these 14 years did incubate in her own bosom the creature that would carry her off. Sort of. That's how he says died in childbirth, right? So he went real heavy right from the start. Very poetic. And so when he did the first two chapters, especially when he does this intro, what is it? NCIS does this oddly, not poetic, where it gives you this sort of weird screenshot, and it cuts to gray, and something in what you're about to see gets to this screenshot, right? But what it reminded me of more was William Morris did this in my mind. That's what I've read recently, where and they did back in the day. He calls it an argument. He has argument, and then he tells you sort of the facts of the story, and then he gets into the story, right? And so it had that kind of a classical feel to it from these old Romans and Greek writers, this kind of thing. Very old feel. It did really good to start. So we get this kid. That's what he calls him through the whole book. The kid. Again, you're trying to, like a poetry, you boil off the things you don't need. And you're left with this nectar that's supposed to be very rich. And you can get across different stories. Different emotions that way. So as you go, now I was thinking this early on, but more so in the later chapters. I don't ever get a real description of anything or anyone. I don't know exactly, other than sort of pale, what this kid looks like for real. I don't get a sense of what Nacogdoches looks like or whatever this part of Mexico is. You know, I get the feel of a desert, the emotion that it brings, the danger, this kind of anything that gives energy and momentum for a fight to say, right? But I don't ever get a sense of what the bar looks like or what the people really look like or what the places look like. Now, it is a Western. And in America especially, we have this long history of Westerns. So we made like 56,000 of them. covering any kind of things you could think, goofy to silly to serious. And then sort of Hollywood just sort of stops for a second, and they hadn't really gone back to it. But the well's pretty dry, as they say. So in my head, I'm like, you can do this every so often as a writer, and that's a bit of a cheat, where you cheat on the fact that everyone knows what New York City looks like. That if I say those words, images will come into your head as a reader, right? So the author can kind of cheat and not have to, describe a tavern, a main street, a dusty road. This kind of, the west of America, sort of the desert area, the square states with their little shrubbery trees, right? It's kind of a cheat, but part of me then was thinking, what if you're not from America? What if you weren't raised on 10,000 Westerns? How much of this story would you lose? And I think you'd lose large chunks of it, right? Because he really needs it to be a Western for some of the interactions to go the way they go. And so I can't give him a lot of credit on those cheats, even though they are. And the further we go from that era that grew up with Westerns, the weaker the cheat is, right? So it's I think this was in 85 he wrote this, or in 89. It's a much better cheat in 89 than it is now, because so many kids haven't grown up watching all the Westerns, right? I haven't seen every John Wayne movie. There was a time when every person would have seen every John Wayne movie, right? So the cheat starts to fail you. He has this kid basically grow up feral. He runs away at 14, which I think Andrew Jackson ran away from his home at 14. He ended up president of America, right? This sort of thing happens. He kind of gets by like a feral animal in a lot of ways. He describes that the kid wanders around at night when everyone else is asleep and gets in fights. That he's not big, but he says he has big hands and wrists. He's trying to sell you that the streets made him tough or something to this effect, right? This is a thing also in the early 90s. They seem to do a lot. They like this kind of a gritty, realistic kind of thing. I don't know why. I think they think when you look back in history, right? You go to the 1800s or something, and you see this person's a gentleman. And you seem to want to put all your moral thoughts, your moral modern thoughts, on to that person. And then explain away his actions through that lens, right? So, if someone in the 1800s says gay, then you know they're actually homophobic. Well, I'm like, no, that doesn't apply to the 1800s, because cultures and morals and languages were all different, right? There were no women in the workforce, really, in the 1800s. Yada, 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 right? So, he wants a lot of this harsh grittiness inserted into a Western in this poetic form. But it doesn't, I don't think it works in real life. Yes, there were viciousness. Yes, there were scalpings and this sort of thing. But it doesn't even work in his own lore. Early on, the kid's in a fight. He gets to a town. He runs away from the people who's helping him because he can't pay him. And again, I say, in my mind, it starts to nag at you, right? The wrong, and then you see it more and more. If the kid is sort of feral, which he never says feral, but you can sort of, when you talk about him coming into town and saying he's never seen this sort of amount of different people, right? Like he's like, it'd have been different maybe if he was an Indian, but I think he was in a cabin, and they don't treat him like an Indian, right? It'd be different if you were actually outside the culture. But he isn't. He is. And to then act like he came from the moon or something, he doesn't understand anything that's going on around him. So he gets in this fight, and then he's starting to lose. Yes, he's young, but you can join an army at 14 back in ye olden days. It's not like the people were all 6'8", You know what I mean? He's starting to just lose a random bar fight to a random crazy person. I guess you could say he had crazy man strength. I think he only did it so that he'd become friends with this guy. What do you call this guy? Toadvine. I don't know. And Toadvine's real vicious, obviously. But like either he was raised on the streets or he wasn't. Right? If you were raised from a young age to 14, which 14 is already young, but put 3-4 years of that and you're in fist fights for random reasons, you'll get tough or you'll get smart, right? And so if he wasn't running, it's because he could probably fight. And if he had strong wrists and big hands, you can land a solid blow and knock a dude out. You know what I'm saying? I mean, if you want to be realistic, gritty, bar fighters can fight. They can hit you. You go down. Some rando drunk guy, some rando crazy is not going to take him out. I don't know. But they have early vicious fighting, and it is consistent throughout the book. Every fight's very vicious, you know. And like I said, you take it all in a certain way at the beginning because of the poetic nature of his writing. But after a while, you start to wonder, does this have a point? Does it have a, you need something grandiose there for all this verbiage to stick to. Otherwise, it's just sort of floating in the ether. Spoiler alert. There is no grand point he sticks it to. He didn't have, what did the Japanese say? The Japanese said about the invasion of China. It's a dragon's head with a snake's body, right? It's just, it doesn't cut the mustard, as they say. It starts so big, but if you add all this, right? So like if you paint, like old school paintings, you'd get one of these from the Renaissance. Well, the blue in there was some kind of a crushed rock. The rock could have been jewelry. I mean, there's an option. You just turn this into jewelry. But instead, I'm going to crush it down to powder and mix it with some, linseed oil, and I'm going to put it on that canvas. So you can imagine how expensive that ink is. I'm going to crush up jewelry to paint with. So now I have this brilliant blue, and it's expensive. I'm not going to waste it, with something that's frivolous in the painting. And even if I did, my audience would look at it and say that was a waste of that ink. And that then will detract. Unless the waste is your point. Which the waste wasn't his point in this book. You see what I'm saying? That's sort of what happens with this book. All this verbiage is just then wasted. And you feel it fairly quickly. 3 or 4 chapters in, by about 3 or 4 chapters, I'm like, I don't think he's got a landing spot for this. And then it just becomes blowing hot air. It is. It's Heart of Darkness without all the sticking stuff in between that makes it great. It's just, if you want to read 2 books and then compare them and to see and start to think about why one's great and one's not, those are 2 you pick. This one and Heart of Darkness, because it's sort of the same it's the same wannabe story, right? They want to get that same thing across, but one does it and one can't. Where does a man come by his notions? A man's at odds to know his mind, because his mind is aught he has to know it with. Right? The people say fun things. But you're talking to this feral kid, so the conversation starts to be strained. Right? Like, why is this person talking this way? Again, I go to Heart of Darkness as a good example. Marlowe, I believe? Marlowe's our guy. And already on the boat, page 1, we, the readers, realize he's a big existential fool. He's big into it. So that when he gets into his story, it's natural. It's first person. We understand this is how Marlowe talks. Here he does not have that. He has a narrator that talks in this great poetry. And then he has dialogue from individuals. And then they sometimes talk in great poetry. But they're feral kids or hermits that live in the wilderness. I'm like, why is a hermit talking like this? Now, again, I can add sage level hermitry in the woods if it builds to something, right? Are you imparting a wisdom on this kid? Is he learning off the land? Whatever your lesson you want to get, whatever growth, whatever point you have. But if you can't see the point, then there is no point to it, right? There's no point to this hermit speaking this philosophicalness to this kid. And then the kid responds like he doesn't care because he doesn't care. He's just trying to water his mule. You see what I mean? And so now it's all sort of getting muddled, lost. He has a chance to join a cattle drive. And to me, I'm like, I wondered why he didn't join the cattle drive. Now, I guess, in my mind, again, I'm guessing now as the reader. I'm trying to think of things that make what I'm reading make sense. My guess is he didn't want to be, contained. At a certain point, if you're not dead, as much as the feral life sucks, you are free, right? You get to do whatever you want, whenever you want, in such a manner as you want. And that's a lot to give up. Generally speaking, if you don't mind the discomforts. So I could see him not wanting, I don't want to work for these people, right? But then this doesn't carry through the rest. It's not a trait I picked up on because it doesn't carry. It's just moment by moment, whatever our author is inclined. He doesn't build the character in any kind of a way. Because later, two events not further on, your feral kid gets to a bar and he's like, I'll work for a drink. Now again, is he feral? Why wouldn't he just steal a drink? And you're like, well, they'd attack you. And I'm like, yes, but he's been feral. He's been on the streets for years. He'd know not to steal in broad daylight. You go through the back. You wait till it's dark. Like he was doing before in all the street fights. He's already used to the nighttime. They'd be like, I don't go into a restaurant thinking I'm going to such and such. I go in thinking I'm going to eat because that's what I'm used to. You do what you're used to. This character is alive in this world. It's a real world. This is how he would act. He doesn't act this way. Instead, he asks to work for a drink. Now, the Mexicans don't understand him. They're Mexicans. And a side note, all the Mexicans in here, when they speak Spanish, it's Spanish. He doesn't translate it for you. Now, I happen to know some, so I can understand what they were saying. But I wonder how much it affects people who don't understand it. Might be a little annoying. In any case, he says, I can clean for you, even though the guy doesn't understand him. He goes and sweeps up a bunch of stuff. And then he's like, I want my drink. And the guy's like, get out of here. I don't know what this is about. And the kid rages. Like he's got stolen from. He fights and then he kills this bartender. At least that's what I think is he kills him. What, my lights flicker? I think he kills him. I mean, he stabs him in the eye with a bottle. I guess maybe you could live. But I think that he killed him. That's how I took it. So I'm like, so he's vicious enough to kill, but not vicious enough to steal. And what it is when you start to see, is the author wants his cake and he wants to eat it too. This is why he picks the West. He likes these moments of honor. Right? He likes saying, yes, ma'am, yes, sir. He likes that he'll work an honest day. Because if the kid's feral and doesn't understand how town works, then why would he think I can work for some food? Because that's the what I said, the cheat. The cheat is there are these rules in the West, in these Western stories, about working an honest day for food and this and that and people helping you. Because that's how people were in the West. You're a stranger, I'll still feed you. It sort of stayed like that till the Great Depression in real life. Then too many people came. And I was running out of food, so it hardened some people in the South in a lot of ways. Again, not saying people didn't kill people or murder or this or that. But this is the temperament of these people. Because you're out there by yourself. It's like the high seas. You don't just completely abandon people. You might bring the bad juju on you. So he wants that. That cheat is working in his mind. But then he wants to show how vicious everything is, and he loses track of what he's doing, right? He loses track that it's the viciousness. And then everything else, character-wise, that should play off that, doesn't. And we have these jarring moments where we're working off the cheat. That's what I mean. Kills the bartender. Later, other people hear about this, and they want him to join their army. So he didn't want to join the cattle drive because it'd be working him too much. But he agrees to join the army. Right? And I might make it make sense. An army is going to work you more. You have less freedom with an army. Even, okay, he's a feral kid. You can say, because lying's not a problem, because he has no social structure. You could say to the cattle guys, yeah, I'll join you. You eat some of their biscuits. You sort of ride on their horses. You do a little bit of work, and then when you get closer to Montana, you bugger out because you're used to living off the land anyway. Right? And it was an easy way, a safer way, to get from point A to point B, because rolling with this cattle herders is easier than by yourself. And now you just go on, because that's what he did before. Some lady was helping him. He didn't have a way to pay, so he just leaves, right? It's a character trait you've shown me as an author. And then it doesn't hold up. You see? Starts to annoy me. But he joins this army. And again, my thinking is, again, a modern sentiment transplanted on older times. I think he thinks, this book was in the 80s something, so the Vietnam War is more on his mind. And so he thinks, the army's where you go to build yourself up quickly if you're from a poor neighborhood or something like that. And you come out with morals and this and that. And I think he sort of doesn't like or believe that sentiment, or just wants to sort of rage against it a little. And that's what his story's doing. Because he joins this army, and then it's just sort of like a bloody mess. They start killing people. It's a freelance army, which is kind of cool in real historical terms, where some cats would just sort of roll up and try and do stuff. But it's not part of the American army. And the captain just wants to kill Mexicans and Indians, essentially. To the extent of his thought process. Gives the kid a gun. They get into some fights. They kill some large numbers of Mexicans. A lot of vicious killing in this book. There's vicious killing in the book, and sort of a liberal use, not a liberal, but a noticeable use of the N-word. So, if those are things you want to avoid this book at all costs. They want him to call him sir, right? They want the captain to be called sir. And again, I'm like, you're trying to show me this sort of structure, but none of the structure ever builds the guy. The kid doesn't sort of rage against it. He has no thoughts about it, at least none that we're given. And there's no real change in his verbiage. You see? No character growth whatsoever about this. At some point, they get jacked up by some Indians. I believe it's Indians. And then the kid and Toadvine, some others get away. End up in jail by some Mexicans, or something to this. They end up in jail. And it's around this time they meet the judge. The judge is our Kurtz from Heart of Darkness. He comes in about halfway through, and by halfway, I'm fairly certain I know he's not gonna be able to stick this landing. That we got no meat on this bone for these verbiages to stick to. So then it's just hot air, right? Once you lose the thread, once you lose the connection, then it just feels like hot air or like a shock jock, right? Where I'm just saying things for shock value. In any case, he meets the judge. And the judge is just at the nth level of everything vicious. Again, he always wants to talk big and smart, philosophical. But then he viciously kills people. I think at one point, he like saves a kid Mexican just to kill the kid later. And even the other guys are supposed to be like, you can't do that. And he does it anyway. Again, it's just to show, by this time you would be used to their viciousness, but you need a higher level of viciousness because the judge is more than they are. He's supposed to be this grandiose figure. And it's about this time with the judge is when the Heart of Darkness connection really hits for me. And then I start to think why that book works so well and why this one doesn't. And it's all those character things I'm saying. The Heart of Darkness is first person, which again I normally don't like. But it allows you insight into how events are changing the person who's talking. Or how they're perceiving them, right? A simple thing can change your perception and it can grow like this. And as a reader, you grow with it, right? Well, he detaches us from that. We don't have first person perspective. And so we just have to take their dialogue as it comes to us. And our narrator is sort of spending too much time with poetry to give us any real insight on what any of that means to any of the characters involved in any way. Right? So it turns into him trying to sell it to us instead of us being there and being sold along with him. Right? That little disconnect is enough. So that in the dialogue, I'd need to see a change. Right? It'd be kind of weak if the narrator just told me there was a change. But even a change in actions I could have taken and used in some kind of a way. Some kind of way to say that the kid is becoming less feral, or society's such and such with his feralness. Some effect on this kid, right? Something, somewhere. But I get any of it. He flounders. And the example I have of his floundering is, oddly enough, the word turd. Okay, so our narrator is having high-minded, poetic verbiage coming at us. It's very rich, right? So the narrator, like if you imagine the narrator's a character, here's this person talking to you. You hear richness coming from him. Our characters are feral, vicious, and crass, right? Cursing, brushing people off, not caring about human life, this kind of a thing. So, in the course of this speaking, if one of our characters had said something's a turd, I wouldn't have had a problem with it. They would say the word turd. But what ends up happening, I think you lose track. I think our author lost track of who's talking. And our narrator says such and such like a turd. And it hits like a turd. Right on your face. And you're like, my narrator wouldn't talk like that. So like even my narrator's off. Even my narrator has lost the plot. Right? We get the judge being existential. And the best he can come up with is, the mystery is that there is no mystery. And I'm like, that's weak. So if you're gonna bring philosophical to me, which you can now, you have enough poetic language that you can bring up these high-minded subject matters, right? And lay them on the table and examine them. In the same way a sci-fi writer is trying to think of the future, of unseen spaceships and alien races. The same way fantasy authors construct these whole worlds of magic. You can as a writer, project your mind into deep philosophy and then try and bring it to your reader, right? But if your vehicle, if all he can come up with is this like 5th grade level, the mysteries, there is no mystery. That's some 5th grade level mess right there. That's not. You're not gonna. That's not heavy. It's not. It's weak. It doesn't take a lot of thinking to reach a state where you said the mystery is there is no mystery. It's not creative. There's like 1900 different philosophy books you can read. Go read the classics and the Greeks and all this and that, and you'll come up with a better line, a better mental than that. It's just not good. Got to bring more heat than that. I'm sorry. The judge really goes off the deep end. Oh my God, I think I just wrote on myself. No, I didn't. We're good. The judge kind of goes off the deep end. The kid gets away from him. And we get a sense that he's grown up a bit. And then the judge refines him randomly, and he's like in a fancy suit or some crap. And he's still spouting philosophical, and he's acting like he wanted to be this kid's father figure. And he's talking about war, and that they'll never know war, and they're gonna this and that. It's just like you're grabbing at straws, as they say. And and that's sort of how it ends. There's an epilogue. I typically don't read the epilogue. I don't read the prologues either. And I wasn't about to read this one's epilogue. I don't know if I don't care how short it was. I was already done with this book by then. My rating, because of the poetry, is good. It's a 2 out of 5. You don't want this if you're into westerns. You do not want this if you're into philosophy. Uh, you, Even like vicious killing, like if you're just into, I want something more impactful. War story or a murder, death, kill book of some kind would probably be better. Basically, anything's better than this book. It goes nowhere. It makes no real point. It doesn't accurately, not accurately. It doesn't do a good job describing anything. You could read it for the poetry aspect ish of it, but it starts to feel like it's just self-congratulatory. You know what I mean? I'm just doing this to puff myself up a little as the author. There's no point to it. All right, it was a short book. It was a short video, and it sucked. So, ad time. I don't know. This might be the roughest time for me. I have both college football going and Starfield dropped. A video game. And it's amazing. I'm not going to do any videos about it. I'm just telling y'all here in the ad portion. Because the super fans are the ones who over here listening to the ad portion, right? So y'all get secret knowledge that the normies don't get. I have to somehow manage to read books and still spend, 85 hours playing Starfield. So I don't know how I'm going to do that, but we're going to find out together. All right. I will see you lovely lot next week.